I'm Professor Ella Shohat. I teach both at NYU and also affiliated faculty at NYU Abu Dhabi. Robert Stem and I, who also will be co-moderating the panel with me, is also a professor at NYU and affiliated faculty with NYU Abu Dhabi. We are both very happy to welcome you to a public panel on the subject of the Middle East, cinema, and the transnational. We want to thank, actually, very much so, the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute for supporting this event and also supporting the conference, because this event is actually is presented to you in conjunction with an academic conference on the subject of transnational cinema media studies. The conference has a transnational array of scholars representing a wide variety of regions, disciplines, and theoretical grids, discussing what is at stake in transnational cinema and media studies. The participants are scholars from multiple geographies and affiliated with multiple academic disciplines. It is not an accident, we believe, that this conference and this public panel are taking place in Abu Dhabi, for the idea of the transnational is especially appropriate to Abu Dhabi. The city represents a new kind of transnational city, at once intensely local, Emirati, and at the same time global, fostering new and surprising modalities of the transnational, a place where people of every continent intersect in complex ways. For example, our typical student at NYU Abu Dhabi is multilingual, was born in one country, lived and studied in another, and might very well move to still another. Over the last decades, Abu Dhabi and the Gulf region generally have become the site of lively film-related and media-related activities, including in the form of major film festivals like the Doha Film Festival, the Gulf Film Festival in Dubai, the Dubai International Film Festival, and of course, the Abu Dhabi Film Festival. And I don't know if we have here the director of the Arab Film Program, Intishal Tamimi, maybe he's here. He's supposed to be here. So in many ways, we see that Abu Dhabi forms a vital site for bringing together media scholars and curators and filmmakers from around the world to deprovincialize a field that too often limits its scope to the West. And I will now hand the microphone to my co-moderator, Robert Stem.
Welcome, everyone. We have four wonderful speakers who can give very much an insider view of Middle Eastern cinema in relation to the transnational. The poor people have very little time, only 12 minutes, so I will take very little time, don't want to take it away from them. But we'll have a reception afterward where you can mingle with our guests. So I'll introduce the first speaker, who is Rasha Salti, who is perhaps the leading curator of Middle Eastern cinema. She has curated series for the Museum of Modern Art and for Lincoln Center in New York, for the Tate Modern in London, for Le Musée Jeux de Paume in Paris, and the International Film Festival in Toronto. She's the author of a number of books, both in English and Arabic, notably Insights into Syrian Cinema, Essays and Conversations with Filmmakers. Rasha?
The ever-generous Robert Stem. Thank you, everybody, for coming. I am very grateful for the invitation from NYU Abu Dhabi, the team that coordinated this wonderful Congress, and for Ella and Bob's continuing support of my work, for the warmth of their friendship and their trust. They have been a guiding light for me, so I'm very intimidating standing here talking while they're listening. I have no clips, so it's not going to be exciting. I just have a few images so when I talk about some films, you can see something. Ella and Bob were kind enough to send us a few questions to help steer the presentation. I will begin with a sketch of the landscape of film production in the Arab world and in recent years, lensing on the impact of the digital revolution. Next, I will reflect on the use of archives in film and video. the writing of the self in history and in the present, and writing a subjective history of trauma. And I will conclude with a few questions around contextualizing or framing transnationalism in Arab cinema in 12 minutes or 11. Two thoughts before I begin. My notes are very much the observations of a practitioner rather than a theorist. In my professional pursuits, when trying to understand how films are made, where the necessity and the desire to make films comes from, and in exploring the soil and the sky of film production, I have understood very quickly that I ought to explore the other disciplines as well, the other creative disciplines as well, namely visual art, literature, poetry, music, and dance. The situation today is not like in the 1960s and 1970s when filmmakers formed collectives, experimented together with poets and painters, collaborated, drew inspiration from one another. In part, it's because of the contemporary market. The disciplines and the communities have been unfortunately segregated, but I find the shared poetics to be a fascinating subject to explore and to interrogate. On another level, and especially with experimental, personal, and subversive cinema, the authors, the contemporary works that present themselves as such, their authors often straddle the worlds of visual arts and film with eloquent agility. And that is another reason for me to consider the other disciplines. The second thought can easily become the generic disclaimer for every occasion when one is asked to draw observations and reflections on the Arab world. You all know it is not a uniform, undifferentiated geocultural realm, and every country has its intricate and complex singularities and histories. Algerian cinema is very different from Tunisian, Moroccan, and Syrian cinema. Fine. The differentiation is not only in the level of context, the state of affairs, and the cinematic language, but also on the question of exposure and exhibition. Arabs rarely see each other's films, or only in very specific occasions. How can one argue that they influence one another, cross-pollinate, or integrate canons? Except for Egyptian cinema, which is the Arab world's Hollywood. This said, I will defend the notion of an Arab cinema and argue that there is a shared poetics. So back to the soil and the sky. Much has been written on the impact of digital technologies on cinema across the world. So I will not rehash the arguments of very adept scholars. In essence, and very briefly, digital technologies can be said to have created a revolution in filmmaking in the Arab world by virtue of their democratizing impact. As cameras became lighter and cheaper and editing software more and more user-friendly, people who never dreamed of having access to filmmaking were suddenly able to make films. Moreover, they were also able to make films outside the system, with very little funding, without seeking permission from the authorities. Concomitant with the increasing availability of digital technologies, there were other things going on. A, cuts in public funding for film production. B, increasing monopolization of privately owned distribution and exhibition networks, as well as consolidation of ownership of theaters in the hands of one or two operators per country. This is disastrous. And C, an increasing policing over freedom of expression and an increased subservience to so-called religious observancy, so a lot more conservative or pretending to be conservative. And D, the emergence of alternative, not-for-profit art spaces that hosted exhibitions of contemporary art, as well as screening of films of all genres and lengths. By alternative, I mean that they were outside the sphere of official culture, as in regime-sanctioned culture, but also elite-sanctioned culture. So these alternative spaces became, and this is another reason it is important to look at video art as well as film, and to look at new literature, new writing, as well as film. because suddenly these alternative art spaces were becoming centers, gravitational centers, for a new generation that was doing things in a different way. Independently produced films challenged prohibitions as well as inhibitions in content and in form. On occasion, they had to face censorship, and on those occasions, interesting instances of solidarity among an alternative / dissident intelligentsia gathered and challenged authority. In their exploration of form, of forging a new language, and by virtue of the fact that they were screening in these alternative spaces, the lines between video art and the cinema that wanted to experiment or simply break rank with mainstream language, the lines became blurred. Thus, several short films were actually screened as single-channel videos, and they actually don't make for video art. And in recent, in the Western canon of the video art. And in recent years, several videos and experimental films have received funding from art foundations or biennials and first exhibited in the framework of art events. To illustrate with a few examples, the grants given, for example, here in the UAE by the Sharjah Art Foundation have enabled actually the production of films, including the work of an Indian collective called CAMP. They do marvelous work, experimental cinema, and the American director Sean Goulet was able to do his feature film Curators just from a grant from the Sharjah Art Foundation. Knowing that Abu Dhabi has, the Abu Dhabi Film Festival has Sanad, and the Dubai Film Festival has the Injaz grant. Rania Stefan also was able to do her award-winning film, experimental film, The Three Disappearances of Su'ad Husni, because of the Sharjah Art Biennial. Moreover, as human rights activists and associations began to use digital cameras to record instances of abuse, torture, sexual harassment, discrimination, they also reached out to a young generation of socially disenfranchised, financially insecure, politically engaged, creative communities. This is a really interesting story because I feel like I was the privileged witness in Egypt of the prehistory to the explosion of audiovisual documentation that happened when the revolution happened. And I always have trouble referring to everything that was filmed and put on the internet and described as a million things, described as evidence, described as citizen journalism, described as vérité or direct cinema. Today, I am not able to yet to indexify, to decide this is cinema and this is not cinema, this is document, this is, and I think I need time. And this is probably my own limitation. But basically, I remember very well in 2005, a street theater troupe that had a small space in downtown Cairo, while the Cairo International Film Festival was happening, decided to have their own independent film festival. And they were like a crew of rowdy boys. They were funny. They weren't trained by human rights activists, but they had a very sharp sense of what was right and what was wrong and what was going on in their country. And without like a proper education, they didn't have a cultural studies degree, but every night they did everything that the Cairo International Film Festival didn't do. They had screenings open to the public all day. They screened films for 5 hours, short films for 5 hours. And every day they had an opening. So it was carnivalesque, it was ridiculous, it was cute. Okay. These guys started making films with mobile phones. And when I first saw the first films they made were films that were about things that were prohibited. Of course, they were not films. But for instance, 2 girls, I'm sorry to say, smoking a joint in a car, filmed themselves exploding in laughter. This is absolutely, totally prohibited. But when they were given a camera, this is the first thing they did. And they showed it to other people. Anyway, okay. The most interesting and tangible aspect of the Arab Spring, and you will forgive my indulgence in calling it a spring, even if it seems demented to do so, that's another discussion, is in my humble opinion the dissipation of self-censorship, or more precisely the dissipation of internalized prohibitions from under previous political regimes. And this trend has emerged even in countries that did not really witness massive protests and regime change. Most of the films are first features. They are generally hybrid forms, ranging between personal cinema or speak in the first person, but that is an alibi to reconstruct a subjective universe, community, or space, and to write oneself in the present. I will cite a few films: Birds of September by Sarah Francis, A World Not Ours by Mahdi Fleifel, My Love Awaits Me by the Sea by Maïstarwaza, Hecho in Casa by Belhassan Handous, and Umué by Corinne Shawi. How much? 0, 1?
Almost.
Almost. Okay. Maybe, yeah. How can I conclude quickly? Just thinking about transnationalism very quickly. When thinking about transnationalism in the Arab world, we have to think about also Pan-Arabism, the intersections with Pan-Arabism and Pan-Africanism. We had, in the 60s, there was also a different form of intersections or engagement with the world. I think the really forgotten is the influence of the Rome Experimental Film School, the Moscow Film School. These kinds of engagements no longer exist today. However, and Pan-Arabism is no longer a guiding paradigm. However, Arab filmmakers are able to connect, collaborate, and co-produce. Talal's story will illustrate the many very creative ways in which this is happening. If in the 1960s and the 70s the cineclubs were the places of encounter of Arabs discovering each other's films, today it's film festivals. It's Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but these are important because of the co-production forums and the markets that they allow. But the really important festivals are the tiny, tiny festivals, like Documentary Film Festival in Agadir, Small Town in Morocco, Bjaya, Village in Algeria, has been one of the most important sites for training in creative documentary. Klibia, town in the desert in Tunisia, amazing festival of amateur cinema. It's the place where almost every Tunisian filmmaker has started his career. So film festivals have this other life today, and the smaller, the more humble, the more focused, the more real and solid. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Talal Al-Muhanna. He is a film and TV producer of documentary and fiction films, working largely with filmmakers from the Arab world. The films have been screened at numerous international festivals. They have won numerous awards and have been sold to broadcasters in the Middle East and Europe. His current productions include the creative documentary Jeanne d'Arc Masriya, supported by the Doha Film Institute, the dance documentary, The New Czar, as well as the production of the two-part documentary series Rise of the Gulf, Beyond the Black Gold, which he will be speaking about this evening. Thank you, Talal.
You're welcome. Let me start by saying that, although I'm a Kuwaiti producer and I'm living in Kuwait, I only came back to the region about 5 years ago. I left Kuwait when I was 10, and my mother's from the States, my dad's Kuwaiti, and we grew up in England, in the United States, and I worked in Germany and Ireland, so I was kind of all over the place and quite transnational creature since I was quite young. So for me, the idea of working across borders, dealing with broadcasters or producers, directors, writers from other countries, from other regions is a very easy idea for me to deal with. It wasn't always like that, and I think I'd like to go back a little bit to tell you how I got there. In 2008, I was doing my master's in film production at Leeds Met University in the UK. And there was an advertisement online for a producer's workshop in Dubai during the Dubai International Film Festival. And if you got in, they paid your way there. So I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. Let's try this. So a German-Iranian film director that was in the school at the same time, and we applied with a short script that he had written, and alhamdulillah, we got in. So it was a great opportunity. We spent a week at the festival, and actually it totally changed my idea of what I thought producing was. When you're in school, it's kind of a contained environment, so you have, your other students are your colleagues on the film set, and the teachers are kind of like your executive producers. You get your equipment from the stores, as we called it in the UK. So there's not this need to have to kind of go outside this environment to try and make your film. And what I learned when I got to Dubai and I did this week-long workshop was that filmmakers were essentially raising money and making their films by cooperating with people all over the world, not even from within their country or their region, but sometimes in France or Italy or the United States. So this was for me a very novel concept to discover at that time, and that I tried to be kind of quick to pick up on it, because what I discovered when I went back to Kuwait later that year was that most of the filmmakers working there were making short films. They were working in really small groups, mostly friends. They were dealing entirely with local issues, often making short comedy sketches or short films related to aspects of the culture, things that they were being confronted with as young people. And they were doing it all out of their own expense. So, it was their pocket was, paying the bill for the production, and their equipment, and no, let's say, engagement with producers or film funds or anything like this. So, I didn't grow up there. I didn't have my teenage and high school and college years in Kuwait. So for me, this was like a part of my life that was not relating somehow to what they were doing. And as much as I liked what they were doing and I admired what they were doing, I can't say that it really spoke to me very much somehow, because it was just a kind of a whole set of experiences that I had never had the privilege or pleasure of experiencing myself. So I quite quickly set about looking for projects and filmmakers that I found A, interesting, and B, I think projects that I felt that I could easily connect with somehow in some way. So through my own experiences of having been a traveler or growing up in other countries and whatnot. And this took off quite quickly somehow. Thanks very much to the film festivals in the region. As Rasha mentioned before, it really became like the nexus for meeting other artists, other producers, and these hubs in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Doha were like, big cooking pots in a way, where you were, I think meeting people, I don't want to say that you never knew existed for the first time, but actually there were a lot of talented people out there. But I think if it hadn't been for the festivals, we probably wouldn't have gotten to know each other somehow. So through these hubs, we managed to pitch each other ideas, pitch each other projects, learn about what was going on in other countries, also in terms of production, which is interesting and I think quite important nowadays. And this, bit by bit, it kind of led to cooperations, like formal cooperations, whereby, a filmmaker, an Egyptian filmmaker in Berlin would work with a Kuwaiti producer, on a project being shot in Egypt. And I like I say, 6 years ago, I never would have imagined this was possible, but this really, for me, became the way to make films. And so for the last 5 years, 3 to 5 years, I've been working with directors, Arab or Arab-descended directors in France, in Germany, in the UK, in Egypt, in Algeria, really from all over. And the film festivals was kind of the jumping off point for that. And the film funds from Abu Dhabi, Doha, and Dubai were the kind of financial catalysts for that to happen. I'm not sure how familiar you all are with the funding in the region, or somewhat, a bit. I'll go through it just very quickly. There are film funds in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, and Doha. They all fund creative documentary, sometimes experimental, fiction films, both short and long. And usually your eligibility for those is based on being either Arab yourself or descended from Arab ancestry as a producer, or the same goes for the director. So one or the other has to be somehow Arab. For example, they will rarely fund an Arab topic film by a French director, though actually the clip I'm going to show you is exactly such a case of that. So it is a little bit the exception, I have to say. But normally it's the idea behind the funds is to support creative, artistic projects, author-driven films, not reportage or the kind of thing you might see generally on Al Jazeera or CNN or BBC Arabiya, this kind of thing. And losing my track here. And not the, let's say, not the foreign-produced documentaries or fiction films per se. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of some of the things that have changed over the last years for the next minute and a half. So the pluses. So as a producer in the Gulf region, these are the things that I think have really improved over the last 5 to 10 years. The first would be the film funds, which we already discussed. Also, there are some. The second thing would be film academies and media organizations like New York Film Academy here in Abu Dhabi, the SA Institute in Dubai, also the various universities in the Emirates, for example, that have media courses that are kind of interacting with filmmaking and video production. So a lot of this didn't exist 5-10 years ago. We have also a proliferation of internet-based TVs. In Saudi Arabia and Kuwait in particular, and these are very, very popular. In Kuwait, there's one called Shunu Ya'ni TV, and it's I think this guy's laughing in front of me. It's a quite irreverent and comic and really on the edge kind of programming, which would never be sanctioned by the official state TV in any way whatsoever. They would be censored for sure. And in Saudi, it's the Telfaz 11 group, and they're producing, again, it's like short films, short sketches. They're very funny things, and it's really where the youth are at. The Gulf Film Festivals, that's the fourth thing we discussed already. The fifth is the Arab-German Film Prize, a very important prize of the Robert Bosch Foundation. Offers 3 prizes of 60,000 euros each for animation, documentary, or fiction, and it's eligible for Gulf filmmakers, so that's something they should keep their eye on. Crowdfunding is also something relatively new in the region. There's an outfit called Aflamna, which is being used now for some films. And then we have Imagination in Abu Dhabi and some other, let's say, diplomatic institutions like the Embassy of France in Kuwait, or the Khaliji Film and TV office in Dubai, which is kind of trying to stir things up that way. Maybe we should cut to the clip pretty soon, because I think time's out. 0 minutes left. Good. Okay.
That is my manzil, my house. You see? Here is all I done it myself.
At home, they have built palaces and gardens in the middle of the desert. Abroad, they have become powerful players in the global economy. What do we know about them and where they come from? Their fathers were fishermen, pearl divers, merchants. They belonged to ancient tribes, and their tribes belonged to the desert. When their time came, some feared that there would never be enough sand to build their dream cities. Their capitals are called Doha, Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, Dubai, the Middle East's hotspots now, and the world's partners who want to lead the Arab people into a new golden age, starting from the Gulf where everything began.
هذا هي البداية، نقطة البداية إلى ما نحن اليوم عليه.
طال عمرك ما نعرف كم اللولو اللي أي فلوس ولا نعرف أي شيء، صار ما حد يشتري اللولو، مو كلش قطعوا.
على السمك، على تمر، على الرز، إلى تقريبا منتصف الستينات.
It is 50 years since I came, and everything has changed and nothing has changed.
4 decades ago, an attempt was made to bring together the Arab peoples of the Gulf. To the south, a federation of 7 states was born. Many predicted they would fail.
Il y avait beaucoup de soupçons parce que, comme vous savez, l'expérience arabe n'était pas brillante.
The city-states of the Gulf were surrounded by unending wars and jealous neighbors.
Through the window of a British worker's flat, the Battle of Kuwait unfolds.
For their safety in a troubled region, the sheikhs relied on foreign powers. First Britain, which ruled over the Trucial coast for over 150 years.
هو في البداية احتلال بس بعدين حماية.
In record time, a handful of Gulf states moved from independence to global influence and prepared themselves for a future beyond black gold.
صراحة صعب يقدر أقلم مع الوضع، يعني ما بين كنا في القرن السابع.
All right, that's why they call it a teaser. You have to wait till the next edition to see the rest. But it's a good example of a local, well, an international project that has regional funding. Doha Film Institute is one of the funders on the project, and it's being made for the French broadcaster Arte. So it's a quite international project.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker is Viola Shafir. Viola is a freelance filmmaker, film curator, and also a film scholar. She's also taking part in our academic conference. She is the author of Arab Cinema History and Cultural Identity, and also of Popular Egyptian Cinema, Gender, Class, and Nation. She has taught film studies at the American University in Cairo and has worked as a consultant for international film festivals and training initiatives like La Biennale de Venezia, the Dubai Film Connection, and the Al Rawi Screenwriters Lab. She has directed several documentaries, among them Shajarat al-Laymun, The Planting of Girls, and My Name is Not Ali, and Scent of a Revolution. Thank you, Viola.
Ella, Bob, I'm so glad that you brought me here. I have to tell you, I know them since, I shouldn't say because it makes us all look old, right?
It's fine.
At least 20 years. And they have inspired me in so many ways. My work really is, I'm very grateful. Really a big part of my work I really owe also to your ideas. I'm very glad to be here, thank you. Well, now from the Gulf to Europe, I guess. I was brought here to talk a little bit about, the role in terms of transnationalism, the role of Europe and for the Arab world. As we have heard right now, the Gulf is trying to carve out space for itself, also in terms of production. So we heard already how much influence it has started to gain on the level of production, but also in the level of support for other Arab productions. Something that has been actually in the past been reserved to Europe. Let me first start with a quotation by Thomas Althusser, who is also present today and one of our teachers. He said today that creative workers, filmmakers are creative workers who have to negotiate their position within the market. And I guess I was brought here also as a filmmaker and practitioner to tell you something about my personal, experience as someone who lives between Cairo and Berlin. And the issue of negotiation is a very crucial one indeed, in terms of what do you actually negotiate as a filmmaker. You negotiate content, you need to negotiate financing, and you need to also negotiate audiences. In view always also of your own identity. Where am I standing with regards to all of these issues? And why do I actually have to negotiate? That's always because, and this now I'm speaking in that sense not as a half German, but as an Egyptian filmmaker, you have to negotiate because this world is dominated by certain power relations. The market cannot be sought without power relations. The market and also audiences actually cannot be sought without these power relations. This is actually the background of all the issues. I will come back to that in a bit more in detail. But first of all, why, as an Arab filmmaker, do I actually have to negotiate? In terms of power relations. Why is that so? First of all, and we heard already a little bit about the history, it's because of the dichotomy that existed already in the Arab world between Egyptian cinema as such, as the so-called, as the commercial mainstream cinema, that was the first cinema that was created, but that has been also functioning as a sort of Hollywood on the Nile, as a sort of dominant cinema within the region that had to be contested by all the other filmmaking nations that started to appear only after independence. That means only after the cease of colonial power, at least in its old version, around the 1950s. And the newcomers in the field, what did they do? I mean, they didn't have the same resources as Egyptian cinema. Egypt is the largest nation in terms of numbers in the region, has been, and it was able to build very early, its position. So, for the rest of what was left over for the rest of the other countries, it was a problem. So we have here the development of what we call the auteur cinema, or the cinema of the author. Filmmakers tried to come up with the help of the state, but this dichotomy, was enforced and forced filmmakers to look for money, if not in their own countries, which were always embattled in terms of financing, or censorship was a big role. I mean, if the state is the only source of financing that you have, like it was the case in Algeria and Syria, then in combination with an authoritarian regime, what can you do? So the only, what left was to go and go fishing elsewhere. That means primarily, the first Arab filmmakers, they turned to France. And in France at the time, in the 1970s, we have, for example, the Agence de ACCT, the Agence for Coopération Technique and Culturelle, which was responsible for financing a number of films, primarily first from Africa, but then also from North Africa. And the early policy of this of these sort of institutions was actually a policy of assimilation. So the filmmakers found themselves in the position to be forced in a way either to assimilate or not to make their films. This situation actually persisted for a very long time, even though, the field opened up with television in the 1980s and 90s. You had, Belgium, France, Germany helping also out. La 7, for example, the French television, they were also opening up venues, but the problem still was you always had to negotiate for your own position and your own identity. So if we look now at the situation today, I mean, for example, film festivals or film funds. For example, I'm part of the selection committee of the World Cinema Fund that belongs to the Berlinale. The Berlinale is one of the, I mean, unlike other festivals, for example, Rotterdam, or where, you know, the funds are linked also to certain conditions. That means you come in, but actually it's about release. If you want to have your film funded there, you have also to screen it there. So these kind of conditions are enforced on filmmakers also. With regards to the World Cinema Fund, there is a sort of different policy. Unlike French institutions, filmmakers do not have to spend their money in Germany, but they can spend it in the countries of origins, which is actually also a novum. It's not usual. But what is the slogan of the World Cinema Fund? The more local, the more global. Again, here we have a negotiation between, you know, I mean, there is this kind of idea of universalism that is enforced on the particularity, the cultural particularity. So as a filmmaker, you find yourself, without questioning, between these poles. You have to negotiate that in order, you know, to succeed on the international market. Thank you.
Thank you.
So since we have very little time, I'll be extremely brief and say of our old friend Richard Peña that few people in the world know world cinema as well as he does. He's seen millions of films and remembers them all in detail. So he was head of the New York Film Festival for 25 years. He's also a professor at Columbia University in film studies. So, Richard.
Thank you, and congratulations to the organizers, Bob and Ella, as others have said, and the NYU Abu Dhabi team for this fine event. In trying to collect my thoughts to prepare for today's talk, and especially after this morning's panels, I was reminded of that great short story by Jorge Luis Borges, in which he describes a Chinese encyclopedia that offered a remarkable system for the categorization of animals, one that included major groupings such as those with wings, suckling pigs, frenzied animals, those that belong to the emperor, those drawn with a fine silk brush, etc. Borges's point, of course, later picked up by Michel Foucault and so many others, was that our way of ordering the world defined our possibilities of thinking about it. The basic categories we have applied to the study of film and media in the past 50 or so years of its existence of the field have not only affected how film has been taught and learned, but also how film books have been published, and further, arguably, how film festivals and cinematheques are programmed. Like, I would wager, at least a few of you, I'm often shocked and upset at how few films my students at Columbia see, especially how few non-American films they see. Yet in recent years, when I've had the occasion in my classes to show films such as the extraordinary Spanish zombie film, Wreck, or the remarkable Mexican cannibal film, We Are What We Are, students often come up to me afterwards bursting with enthusiasm. First, because they can't believe that someone as square as me would show films like these. But second, because they seemingly can't wait to talk to me about their other favorite zombie or cannibal films from other far-flung film cultures. What I finally had to admit was that, in fact, a good percentage of my students were, in fact, seeing a considerable number of non-American films. They just weren't seeing the ones that I was seeing, or at least the ones that I was programming at the Film Society of Lincoln Center at that time. Some, I discovered, had an impressive knowledge of such topics as J-horror, Japanese horror, K-horror, Korean horror, while others were wild devotees of such masters of 70s Spanish horror, such as Jess Franco and Bigas Luna. Yet somehow, they didn't relate to these films as foreign at all. I've been around long enough to believe that most things in the field of film studies and film programming, whether or not these two are always related, are in some way cyclic. That led me to believe that we've entered into a period, let's imagine it's only a phase, in which there has emerged a profound disinterest, bordering on disbelief, in the category of the national. Among my students and many younger critics and programmers that I encounter, I find that the idea of locating a given work within a national film culture arouses almost open hostility, as if the historical, political, or social circumstances surrounding its production or an approach to its interpretation seem peripheral at best. On the contrary, what seems to be replacing the national has been a somewhat exaggerated return of auteurism, with almost complete focus on artists who not only rise above their local circumstances, but who seem capable of creating their art anywhere. After all, when probably the greatest masterpiece of Ho Xiaoshan Flowers of Shanghai, shot in the PRC, spoken in Shanghainese, based on a novel by Hong Kong writer Eileen Chang, and directed by a man of Hakka Chinese origin, how much does it really tell us when we identify it as a Taiwanese film? Even when we follow it with a rejoinder about how Taiwanese identity is inherently hybrid. And didn't Kiarostami just make a film in Italy and then one in Japan? In the case of Middle Eastern cinema, at least and as unwieldy a term as European cinema, as it attempts to unite too many disparate types of film experiences based simply on shared geography, one could argue that the idea of national cinemas at best corresponds to a particular historical period in its overall development. At most, certainly in this audience, as most people certainly in this audience knows, the cinema in this region, this Middle Eastern cinema, was until the 1960s essentially the Egyptian cinema, a largely commercial, industrially produced cinema that was widely exported throughout the region, and which, at least until the emergence of Nasser, attempted to create a kind of one-size-fits-all cinema that would represent everyone from the so-called Arab world. By the 1960s, however, spurred on by their own anti-colonial struggles, as well as examples of new forms of filmmaking from Europe and Latin America, other nations from the region began to jumpstart filmmaking in their own countries: Algeria, Syria, Tunisia, Lebanon, Iraq, Morocco. In reaction to the politics of the one-size-fits-all cinema of Egypt, the aim of these newly emerging cinemas was to create works that focused on the specificity of national experiences, especially anti-colonial struggles, as a tool for helping forge national identity. Until the rise of Nasser, the Egyptian cinema had been a completely commercial cinema, paid for by local entrepreneurs. In contrast, these new national cinemas depended largely on state support. By the 1990s, however, yet a third development emerged, a new generation, if indeed it were only one, whose two most potent examples were the emergence of the Palestinian cinema that exploded onto the international scene, as well as the rise of the Beur cinema, works made by first and second generation emigres in France and elsewhere. For both of these inherently diasporic cinemas, the question of a problematic notion of nation or homeland seemed to anticipate the aversion to the national that I argue has become such a powerful contemporary critical position. Moreover, both, especially the Palestinian cinema, came to depend on a variety of new transnational, or can we just say international, funding sources. Entities such as the Hubert Bowles Fund, Monte Cinema Verità, Fund Sud, or more recently, the funding agencies that have opened up here in the Gulf. To finally reflect on some of the questions that have motivated this panel, in following what I've tried to lay out, considering that I believe we live in a period where the national as a critical category for many in the field has lost relevance, what sense does it make to discuss a category as vague as Middle Eastern cinema? What does any filmmaker gain by being lumped together regionally in an era where the notion of nation itself is under siege? Yusuf Shaheen, I recall, always refused to be part of any program that was called Middle East or Arab cinema, But then again, I recall he also refused to be part of any program that wasn't specifically called Youssef Chahine. Even if, during my years as a film programmer, I resorted to such general programs such as a centenary of Arab cinema, an event I organized with Alia Arasuli in 1996, it was always in the hopes of moving towards more concentrated programs, such as retrospectives I did do of Youssef Chahine or Saleh Abu Saif, or series on Syrian and Lebanese cinema I did with my dear friend Rasha Salti. As a film programmer, at least in the United States, you were dealing with audiences who in large part were astoundingly ignorant about the Middle East, who had at best the vaguest knowledge of differences between nations or various parts of the region. Through these programs, we tried to argue for the specificity of particular national film histories, the Syrian, the Tunisian, the Lebanese. Yet the flip side of that, the other edge of that rhetorical sword, was presenting each of the films selected as somehow representing what we were offering as the national, making each filmmaker shoulder that burden, whether or not they wanted to. I always hoped that from the general, one could then move on to the more specific. Yet the current attitude, as I understand it, is that there's little to be gained from seeing individual works, at least in those larger national contexts. It's been a hard pill for me to swallow, as all of my thinking and all of my academic formation has been built around seemingly unshakable notions of the importance of the national, something surely reflected in my work as a programmer as well. Yet, in the past 17 months since I left the Film Society, I've already seen a number of the national film programs I organized quietly dismantled by my replacements. The new vision, I guess, of a new, younger generation. So if an ultimate aim of this particular panel is to come up with some kinds of ideas which may be translated into bits of advice for working filmmakers, I guess mine would be, in today's world, you are your own homeland. And where you were born, where your parents were born, where the money that will make your next film comes from, all of these things matter less than, finally, where you yourself, in a symbolic and literal sense, are at. As filmmakers, as well as human beings, that should be your principal focus. Thank you.
Thank you for a great panel. My question is probably most towards Talal, but equally sort of to everybody else, is in the film clip that you showed, I couldn't help but think, A, because you're Kuwaiti, and B, because we're talking about films, of that really famous Kuwaiti film, whose name I can't think of the Pearl Diver.
Pearl Diver.
Right? And so my question is actually perhaps in the sense relating to Richard's comments of this kind of new generation of, is there a resurgence, if you will, at least of watching those kind of old classic, i.e. national sorts of films, and whether those tend to circulate as well, whether in festivals or elsewhere, right? So are those films kind of still alive? Is there an interest in them? Do they appear anywhere? Thank you.
Yeah. You know, the director of the film, Khalid As-Siddiq, he's alive, and he's alive and well, but Bes Ya Bahar, or the English
Cruel Sea
transliteration, which is O Cruel Sea, and The Wedding of Zayn, which was his second film in the 1970s. You know, since then he didn't make much actually since then. And sadly, you know, one of the reasons he gave was that there was not much support in Kuwait at the time for making those films, and a lot of the complaints that the young filmmakers were having nowadays were similar to the ones he was having when he was making films. And the generation in between actually have said almost the same. Now, you know, they have seen these films, and I think, you know, he holds a special place in Kuwaiti cinema history, but the truth of the matter is that the filmmakers are still very much on their own, and even though you have this proliferation of digital technology and access to editing programs like Final Cut, and, you know, it's quite easy in a way to make any kind of film, whereas in his day he was really shooting on film, let's say. 16 millimeter, no, I think. it's still a real struggle, actually, to get anything more than short films made in Kuwait nowadays. I think it will improve a bit. There's a Ministry of State for Youth Affairs. Sounds very pompous and important, but we have a wonderful undersecretary working there who was herself a film producer. She co-produced the film Mágica, which was in Cannes, I think in the Cannes a few years ago, and was one of the producers on Journey to Mecca, which was an IMAX film. So she's a serious, really smart, really dedicated film producer. And the reason she shifted from commercial film production into the government sector was because she thought that was where she could have the most impact in a way. So it's a new venture. It's called Adesa. And everybody's kind of waiting to see where it might go because the filmmakers, they need some support.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Viola, and then Rasha.
I think it would be maybe worth checking on the internet whether the film is available online, because what you find is that young people are quite often these historical works end up on the internet. Someone uploads them, hijacks the screening and then pirates the screening, and so you will find most of the Egyptian films. Recently also, like documentaries from the 70s from Egypt, for example, that are not available on film. You'll find them, someone, even sometimes the filmmakers themselves upload them, so they are available. So this is, I think, a new also trend that you find actually exactly these historical films that were, like 20 years ago when we were doing research, it was impossible to find these films. You had to travel, to the Cinematheque in Algiers in order to see a film from Morocco if you want, if you were lucky to find it there. But today, so many things are available, which is, like a mega, jump, a leap forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Rasha.
I would, and I think Talal can even add on that. If you look at Kuwaiti video art, like the stuff that artists are doing today, it's so crazy and beautiful and creative and performance. Then you can feel that film is next. You really can feel it. And I mean, the ones I'm crazy about are by women. Munir Al-Qadiri, to be specific. Completely unexpected. And not necessarily drawing from whatever Khaled did. It's drawing from culture, it's drawing from, but gorgeous. I mean, there was that beautiful event like a week ago or so.
I'm sorry. I'm traveling all the time. I have no idea where I am, from one morning to the next, so I agree, I concur.
Richard?
Just anecdotally in terms of classics, last summer in Jordan, I offered through Columbia a class on how to teach film studies, and it was to secondary and university teachers. And I ended my last class was actually a screening of Cairo Station, and out of 22 students, only 3 had seen it before. So I was a little shocked that that was the level of awareness of what I consider one of the greatest of all Arab language films.
I just wanted to ask about the role, you talked about the role of film festivals as sort of an important platform for filmmakers to sort of, discuss ideas, and the smaller the better is what you said, Rasha. But I was wondering about the life cycle of films beyond the film festivals and sort of how the role of, I guess, the dearth of exhibition spaces for the most part beyond, Metropolis in Beirut and Rif in Tangier, how that affects the growth and sort of the proliferation of films in this part of the world.
I mean, I think we are at a turning point I mean, the people who bring films, the distributors, are in a crisis. People who own cinemas are in a crisis, and then there's us who want to see other films. Thank God ART and Rotana are buying the films that you see in the Arab film festivals, the Anne-Marie Jasseh, the Omar, all these, Marwan Hamid, everybody. They're buying, and there's a chance to see them on TV. At least there's that. I know it's a completely different experience. As I've been traveling in Africa, I would say that there is where cinemas are closed, the old cinemas are closed, There is VOD has a new life there. Mobile telephones, etc., are also potentially a new future. They've invented beautiful things, tent screenings, and mobile cinema screenings in the countryside and in neighborhoods. They have small neighborhood festivals in Dakar. Every town, every country has a story. I think we need to be more creative, but until now, the festivals are the place to show and discover these films. We need to, but I can see it coming also. I can see it coming as we are more and more implicated in each other's lives. You look at an Arab film, the credits in 2003 and 2013. In 2003, everybody was Egyptian. In 2013, the DOP is Lebanese, the cinematographer is Lebanese, the editor is French, whatever, Morocco. I mean, you can track a tighter collaboration. I'm talking about our film, like the small films, the independent. There is, I can see that it's something that will come up.
I'll just add quickly, as a producer, it's never enough, you know, because we're out there to turn a bit of a profit somehow, as well as having sort of artistic enterprise and supporting filmmakers. You know, we're not a charity organization, though usually we are a charity organization. So in my opinion, the TVs, they don't buy near enough as much as they should, and they don't pre-buy, so they don't invest in Arab films enough as they could and should, I believe. So for me, generally, it's quite a big disappointment because I sell more films in Europe than I do in the Arab world, and I find that embarrassing.
Richard?
Yeah, for a long time, I used to answer questions like this by saying we're all living through the end of the theatrical model, that within our lifetimes we'll see multiple closings and the cinema will become more and more of a museum art. You'll have to go to specialized places like museums to see cinema. I think that's largely true in America and probably Europe and maybe here in the so-called Middle East, so-called Arab world. It certainly isn't true in China, where they seem to be building cinemas at an unbelievable rate, hundreds per week. So, I mean, there seems to be some parts of the world, I believe in India as well, there's also a real spate of cinema building. But in many other parts of the world, that's not true. So, yeah, we'll have to see how that shakes out. Maybe it'll eventually stop and close there. But certainly in the US and Europe and other places, I think that my suspicion is that we're going to see a large number of cinema closings, within the next 10 years.
I have a related question, and actually Richard slightly already answered my question, but I'm still wondering about the specific situation here, Abu Dhabi. I've been teaching here 3 years, so every fall I require my students to go to the Abu Dhabi Film Festival, watch one film, write a review. Is part of the class evaluation. Because it's such an important and unique opportunity to see the world cinema for 10 days successfully, which implies that actually that's the only case, the only opportunity to have such cinematic experience here. For the rest of the year, there are nothing like that. Almost there's nothing like that. And then if you go to just the commercial cinemas in Marina Mall, Abu Dhabi Mall, you only have either Bollywood or Hollywood, right? There are no Asian, European, other types of films. I mean, even in genre commercial films, there are still many interesting films that we need to watch, and then and students especially too. But then there's some certain thirst here when I teach films, especially here. And then also there's no cinematheque, definitely. I mean, Lincoln Center is not just the headquarters of the New York Film Festival, but also it shows films every day, and when you go there, you can just see at least 1 or 2 interesting films, right? And so I think that in my experience here, in terms of the production, it's a kind of very strong top-down, investment, like a festival and then 24954, something like that. But in terms of the bottom of film culture, zero, yeah. So I think that is very important. Why? Because we need to have a film culture from which new generations of film makers or whatever come out. And then I agree that, a lot of theaters are closed, but at the same time, I still think that there's some role that the traditional theaters can have.
I couldn't agree more. I think they could.
Yes. So I'm wondering, I'm not sure if all the panel members are based here, but then if not here, in other places in the Arab world, what are the situations of this kind of film culture in terms of reception rather than simply production?
I'm not going to answer your question because it's monumental, and I feel like I've spoken a lot already. But what I want to do is, the director of Abu Dhabi Film Festival is sitting behind you.
Whom we mentioned just before at the introduction.
I actually want to turn the question to you. You live here and you're teaching people. What the question?
Intishal Tamimi, of the director of the Arab program in the Abu Dhabi Film Festival. Please answer the question.
No, but I just want to make one comment.
Sure.
In the visual arts, you don't have museums here yet that show Emirati art. You barely have galleries the galleries show other art, not Emirati art, or very little. And yet, the artists, if you look at the art scene, it's far more complex, eloquent, self-assured than the film scene. Same for poetry. The question is, what is wrong with cinema? Is it the way it's being taught? Is it the way people are told to hold the camera? The models of production that are being set up? Is it the approach to the expectations or the aspirations that are projected? That's my question.
Okay. Intishal.
Actually, thank you for mentioning 10 days of Abu Dhabi Film Festival, because actually in Abu Dhabi and in United Arab Emirates, even the mainstream film is different than what we can see in Europe and even in Lebanon. I mean, they choose very, very limited, very bad films here in the normal cinema. That's why these 10 days become like an island for the people who would like to attend serious films. But I think there is some initiative now. For example, for us, there is weekly screening done by us in Al Makan. It's for 30 persons, but it's still one possibility. And I heard that there is several embassies would like to do a weeks of, for example, the first time Sitora Aleva, the director of Curator Film Festival, convinced the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia to have a Russian week here in Abu Dhabi. And there is, of course, English week, and there is more possibility. I mean, I met Mexican institution, and they would like to have a week of films here because they are interested in having relationship to the economically to Abu Dhabi and to United Arab Emirates. That's why for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll just have our panelists respond because we have to also go out for a reception, so you'll have time to interact with our panelists on a more individual basis. So any comments, anybody? Please, if you would like to make any final comments.
I do think, and I very much hope that perhaps the Abu Dhabi Festival will be able to create a year-round program. I know it was essential for the work at Lincoln Center for us to eventually become a year-round entity in New York City.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, and please go out for the reception.